I'd like to call this joint assembly to order. This joint assembly is convened in accordance with the provisions of JRS 3, which the clerk will now read.
JRS 3, joint resolution to provide for a joint assembly to receive the report of the committee appointed to canvass votes for state officers. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives that the two houses meet in joint assembly on Thursday, January 7, 2021 at 10 o'clock in the forenoon to receive the report of the joint canvassing committee appointed to canvass votes for governor, lieutenant governor, state treasurer, secretary of state, auditor of accounts, and attorney general. And if it shall be declared by said committee that there had been no election by the voters of any of said state officers, then to proceed forthwith to elect such officers as have not been elected by the voters. And be it further resolved that the joint assembly shall be concurrently conducted electronically, at which members of the General Assembly may participate, debate, and vote from a remote location. And be it further resolved that should a ballot be necessary, voting by ballot shall be conducted as practicable, consistent with Vermont's early or absentee voter statute at 17 BSA section 2531 et sec.
Chair will now recognize the co-chair of the Joint Canvassing Committee appointed to canvass votes for the state officers, the senator from Windham District, Senator White, for the purpose of receiving the report of this committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I give the report, I want to say that many might consider this report and the approval largely ceremonial. But in light of yesterday's events, we are reminded that every single step we take to defend and preserve our democracy is important and to be taken seriously. So thank you to all who take this defense seriously. Now for the report. On January 7th, 2021, the Joint Canvassing Committee appointed by the Senate and the House of Representatives to canvass the votes for governor, lieutenant governor, state treasurer, secretary of state, auditor of accounts, and attorney general respectfully reports that having been duly sworn, it has attended to the duties of the trust and finds the number of votes to have been. So for governor, total votes cast for the governor, 362,711. Necessary to have a major part of the votes, 181,356. Those receiving votes are Wayne Bilodeau, the 3rd St. Albans City Independent, 1,413. Mike A. DeVos, Newport City Independent, 1,160. Charlie Dickinson, Montpelier Unaffiliated, 1,037. Kevin Hoyt Bennington Independent, 4,578. 76, I'm sorry. Emily Payton Putney, Truth Matters, 3,505. Phil Scott Berlin, Republican, 248,412. Aaron Hazlitt Whitney, Arlington Independent, 1,777. David Zuckerman, Heinsberg, Progressive Democrat, 99,214, and miscellaneous write-in votes, 1,599. And agreeable to the constitutional provisions, it hereby declares Phil Scott, who received a major part of the votes, to be the governor of the state of Vermont for the 2 years next ensuing. For lieutenant governor, the total votes cast for lieutenant governor were 356,234. Necessary to have a major part of the votes is 178,118. Those receiving votes were Wayne Bilodeau III, St. Albans City Independent, 5,101. Ralph Corbo Wallingford Banish the F-35s, 2,289. Chris Erickson, Chester Progressive, 7,862. Molly Gray, Burlington Democrat, 182,820. Scott Milne, Pomfret Republican, 157,000. 65, and miscellaneous write-in votes, 1,097. And agreeable to the constitutional provisions, it hereby declares Molly Gray, who received a major part of the vote, to be Lieutenant Governor of the state of Vermont for the 2 years next ensuing. For state treasurer, the total votes cast for state treasurer were 343,845. Necessary to have a major part of the votes, 171,923. Carolyn Whitney Brannigan, Georgia, Republican, 114,177. Chris Erickson, Chester, Progressive, 14,142. Beth Pierce, Berry City, Democrat, 197,255. Alex Wright, Essex, Independent, 17,939. And miscellaneous write-in votes, 332. And agreeable to the constitutional provisions, it hereby declares Beth Pierce, who received a major part of the votes, to be the state treasurer of the state of Vermont for the 2 years next ensuing. For Secretary of State, the total votes cast for Secretary of State, 346,920. A plurality, not a majority of the vote is required. Jim Condos, Montpelier, Democrat, 214,666. Chris Erickson, Chester, Progressive, 11,171. H. Brooke Page, Washington, Republican, 99,564. Kamala Smith, St. Albans City, Independent, 21,210. And miscellaneous write-in votes, 309. And agreeable to the constitutional provisions, it hereby declares Jim Condos, who received the greatest part of the votes, to be the Secretary of the State of Vermont, Secretary of State of the State of Vermont for the 2 years next ensuing. For Auditor of Accounts, total votes cast for Auditor of Accounts is 317,052. A plurality, not a majority, is required. Chris Erickson, Chester, Progressive, 48,731. Doug Hoffer, Burlington, Democrat, Republican, 266,445. And miscellaneous write-in votes, 1,876. And agreeable to the constitutional provisions, it hereby declares Doug Hoffer, who received the greatest part of the votes, to be the Auditor of Accounts of the state of Vermont for the 2 years next ensuing. For Attorney General, total votes cast for Attorney General, 345,515. A plurality, not a major part of the vote, is required. T.J. Donovan, South Burlington, Democrat, 234,061. Chris Erickson, Chester, Progressive, 15,846. H. Brooke Page, Washington, Republican, 94,892. And miscellaneous write-in votes, 696. And agreeable to the constitutional and statutory provisions, it hereby declares T.J. Donovan, who received the greatest part of the votes, to be the Attorney General of the state of Vermont for the 2 years next ensuing. This report, containing the results of the votes for each statewide office, is respectfully submitted to the Senate and the House of Representatives at the State House in Montpelier, Vermont on Thursday, January 7th, 2021 by the Joint Canvassing Committee. If anybody has any questions about it, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
The chair will now recognize the member from Bradford, Representative Copeland-Hanzas, co-chair of the committee, for the purpose of making a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the report of the Joint Canvassing Committee be adopted by this joint assembly.
Now, the representative from Bradford, Representative Copeland-Hanzas, co-chair of the committee, has then moved that the report of the Joint Canvassing Committee be adopted by this joint assembly. The motion has been made that the joint assembly adopt the report of the Joint Canvassing Committee. Are you ready for the question? Checking to see if anybody raises their hand on this screen. If so, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Believe everybody has voted. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the report of the Joint Canvassing Committee is adopted. Before I dissolve this joint assembly, I have a brief remark to make. As the co-chair of the canvassing committee stated at the beginning with reference to the events yesterday, I just want to thank Vermont and Vermonters who believe in the institution that we are upholding through this process, and that we recognize the appropriate and free speech methods that do not create fear and do not create a lack of faith in the institution. I also want to thank Governor Scott for his clear remarks and his leadership in commentary with respect to what occurred yesterday. I know it is appreciated by many here and by many across the country to have clear leadership with respect to the occasions of yesterday. Thank you, Governor Scott. And finally, I just want to make a brief remark that for those who question why the Black Lives Matter movement exists, please recognize how the individuals, some would arguably say domestic terrorists, how they were handled yesterday and what would have happened if the majority of them were Black or people of color. We know from past instances across this country what would have happened, and that is why this conversation is happening and needs to continue. There being no further business, I do hereby declare this joint assembly dissolved.